The cell was dark, damp, and silent, except for the faint dripping of water from the cracked stone ceiling. She had forgotten how many days had passed. 13 years in the same place had made time meaningless. Her body was thin, her skin bruised from the heavy chains that cut into her wrists and ankles. Every day, the alien guards dragged her out, mocked her, and returned her broken. Yet in her eyes, a tiny spark of life remained, a small light the Baron had never managed to crush. She whispered to herself in the silence, words that kept her alive. One day, I will escape. The alien Baron was a creature of cruelty. His towering form, with bone-like armor on his shoulders and a face hidden behind a mask of metal, was enough to make his slaves tremble. He enjoyed watching her suffer. Sometimes he would enter the cell just to look at her and remind her that her life was his to play with. "You are mine forever," he would hiss, his voice cold and sharp. But she never replied. Speaking only gave him joy. Instead, she saved her strength, waiting for the smallest mistake, the smallest chance. For years, no chance came. Every guard knew the punishment for letting her escape. The Baron's fortress was surrounded by walls of black stone and guarded by beasts that sniffed the air for fear. Even if she somehow got past the gates, the barren wasteland outside was worse than a death sentence. She had seen slaves thrown out there, only to return hours later in the jaws of desert hunters. Still, she dreamed. She remembered sunlight, fresh air, the sound of birds that once filled her childhood. Those memories became her only treasure in the endless night. That night, something changed. The fortress was restless. She could hear shouts in the corridors, the sound of alarms in the distance. The guards were running back and forth. Her door rattled as one alien slammed it shut, but in his hurry, the lock did not fully catch. She stared at it in disbelief. For long minutes, she only sat there, frozen. Was it a trick? Was the Baron testing her again? Her heart pounded in her chest like it wanted to burst. She touched the iron bars. The lock was half turned. A little push, and it would open. Her hands shook so much she could barely grip the cold metal. With all her strength, she pulled, and the door creaked open. The sound echoed down the hallway, but no one came. Her chains clattered as she stepped out, each movement louder than thunder in her ears. For 13 years, she had imagined this moment, yet now she was terrified. The air outside the cell was thicker, filled with the smell of smoke and burning fuel. She crept along the wall, her bare feet leaving bloody prints on the rough floor. Every corner she turned, she expected to see guards. She heard their heavy boots rushing above, but none were near her. Her body begged her to stop, to rest, but she forced herself forward. She reached a window high in the stone wall. The bars were wide enough for a thin body like hers. She pressed against it, looking out. Beyond was the night sky, a sea of stars she had not seen for years. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she forgot everything. The chains, the fear, the Baron. Freedom was right there. She tried to climb, but her arms were weak. The chains around her ankles clinked and pulled her back down. Tears burned her eyes, but she bit her lip and tried again. With a desperate push, she wedged herself through the opening. The rough stone tore at her skin, but she didn't stop. One last shove, and she fell to the ground outside with a painful thud. The cold air hit her like a shock. She lay there, staring up at the stars, breathing the taste of dust and freedom. For the first time in 13 years, she was outside the Baron's walls. Then the alarms screamed. Red lights blazed from the towers, sirens roared through the wasteland, and alien voices shouted in anger. She scrambled to her feet, her body screaming in pain, but her spirit burning with fire. The Baron knew she was gone. His hunters would be released. The ground shook as the gates opened, and creatures with glowing eyes raced out into the night. The Baron's voice boomed across the fortress, filled with fury. "Bring her back to me, alive." She ran. Her legs, though weak, carried her faster than she thought possible. The desert stretched before her, endless and terrifying, but it was better than chains. Every shadow looked like death. Every gust of wind carried the smell of the Baron's beasts. She stumbled, fell, and got up again, blood staining her knees. Behind her, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Drones flew into the sky, searching for her with beams of light. She pressed herself into the dirt, praying not to be seen, her breath ragged and shallow. The night was merciless, and so was the Baron. She knew this was only the beginning. Freedom had come, but it demanded everything from her. She had nothing. No food, no weapon, No strength left, only her will to survive. And that was something even 13 years of torture could not break. She pushed forward into the dark wasteland, every step a promise to herself. She would not be taken again. The Baron's rage shook the walls of the fortress. His voice carried like thunder through the corridors, cold and sharp enough to make even his guards tremble. "She is mine. She cannot escape me," he roared, slamming his fist against the stone throne that overlooked the courtyard. The floor cracked beneath the weight of his anger. His hunters gathered, creatures with long limbs, glowing eyes, and metal claws, each bred for one purpose: to track and capture. Beside them, drones hummed to life, their searchlights sweeping the night as they rose into the starry sky. The Baron pointed toward the wasteland. "Find her. Do not let her reach the human lands. Bring her back alive, slowly." Out in the open desert, she ran until her lungs burned. Her bare feet cut against sharp rocks, leaving trails of blood in the dust. Each breath was like fire in her chest. The silence of the night was broken only by the faint sound of alarms fading behind her. She thought for a moment she had gained distance, but then came the cries of beasts released into the dark. Their growls carried through the wind, low and hungry. She froze, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The chase had begun. The wasteland was endless, a sea of shifting sands and jagged stone. The moonlight painted it in pale silver, but it gave her no comfort. The land itself was a trap, filled with pits where monstrous creatures hid, waiting for prey. She had seen prisoners thrown into this place before. None had returned. Now it was her turn to face the same nightmare. Only this time, she had no chains holding her back. Every step was freedom, but every shadow was death. Her body trembled, weak from years of starvation. Still, she pushed forward. Her mind screamed at her to stop, but her heart remembered sunlight, remembered laughter, remembered a world outside the Baron's prison. She could not let it end here. She ducked behind a boulder, pressing her back to the cold stone, listening. The ground vibrated with the heavy steps of hunters moving closer. The air grew foul, filled with the metallic scent of their bodies. She covered her mouth to silence her breathing. A drone's beam passed over the stone, missing her by inches. The hum of its engines sent shivers through her bones. The Baron sat in his war room, watching through the eyes of his machines. He smiled beneath his mask, cruel and confident. "She thinks she can run," he muttered, "but the desert is mine." He ordered his hunters to spread out, circling her path, cutting off escape routes. In his mind, the hunt was already over. He would break her spirit again, show her that freedom was only an illusion. That was his pleasure, giving hope and then destroying it. She stumbled deeper into the wasteland, her legs barely carrying her. She saw the ruins of old stone towers half buried in sand. Maybe once they belonged to her people before the Baron conquered them. Now they stood as broken skeletons, whispering of a forgotten time. She crawled inside one of the ruins, hiding in the hollow shell. Dust choked her lungs, but she forced herself to stay silent. Her body ached for rest. She closed her eyes for only a second, but then a sound jolted her awake, a growl, low and close. Through the cracks in the wall, she saw glowing eyes moving in the dark. One of the Baron's beasts had caught her scent. Its long body slithered closer, claws scraping the stone. She held her breath, every muscle frozen. The beast sniffed the air, its jaws dripping with saliva, sharp teeth glinting in the moonlight. Slowly, she reached for a broken shard of stone lying near her hand. Her fingers wrapped around it tightly, though she knew it was no match for the monster. If it came inside, she would fight, even if it was her last act of defiance. The beast stepped into the ruin, its shadow towering over her. For one terrible moment, its eyes locked with hers. She tensed, ready to strike. But then, a loud whistle cut through the night. The beast froze, tilted its head, and turned back. The Baron's command echoed across the desert. "Not yet. Drive her further. Tire her. I want her crawling when she returns." The beast snarled and retreated, its footsteps fading into the night. She let out a shaky breath, her entire body trembling from fear and relief. The Baron wanted her alive, but not safe. He wanted her to suffer in the hunt. She crawled out of the ruin, knowing she could not stay in one place. The desert stretched before her like an endless test. She moved under the cover of darkness, using shadows to hide, every sound making her flinch. The night grew colder, the stars sharper, but she barely felt it. What haunted her was not the wind or the cold, it was the knowledge that the Baron was always watching. His hunters did not sleep, his drones did not tire, and he would never stop until she was back in chains. She whispered to herself again, the same words she had repeated for years in her cell. One day, I will be free. Now those words were no longer a dream. They were the only thing keeping her feet moving. She promised herself she would not be caught again. Not by the Baron, not by his beasts, not by the desert itself. Even if it killed her, she would choose death over chains. Somewhere far ahead, beyond the endless sand, there had to be something else. A chance, however small, that she could find safety. And so she ran again, her shadow stretching across the wasteland, chased by lights, hunted by monsters, but driven by hope stronger than fear. The night was cold, and her breath came in sharp bursts as she stumbled across the wasteland. Her legs felt heavy, her body close to breaking, but she forced herself to keep moving. Every step seemed harder than the last, and her vision blurred from exhaustion. She had no sense of direction anymore. She only knew she had to stay away from the hunters and their drones. The beams of light swept across the sand behind her, always searching, always closing in. She could almost feel the Baron's eyes through them, watching and waiting. The thought made her push forward, even when her body begged her to stop. Hours passed, though to her they felt like days. Her skin was dry and cracked, her lips bleeding from thirst. Her feet left a trail of blood in the sand. Still, she did not stop. Finally, far ahead, she saw shapes rising from the desert, metal and stone, broken and half buried in the shifting dunes. She blinked to be sure her eyes were not lying to her. It was not another ruin of her people's old world. This was different. Human design. Straight lines, heavy iron plates, shattered towers of steel, an abandoned outpost left behind after the last human war in this region. Her heart beat faster, though she did not know if this was salvation or just another trap. Humans were rare here. The Baron had driven most of them away, those who had not been enslaved or killed. The stories whispered in the cells said humans were strong, dangerous, and stubborn. Some called them rebels who never bowed to alien masters. She did not know if those stories were true. All she knew was that this ruin might hold shelter or water, or at least a shadow to hide from the Baron's beasts. She crawled toward the broken walls, her body shaking. The metal was rusted, eaten away by years of storms. The doors were shattered, hanging by twisted bolts. Inside, the air smelled of oil and dust. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself, leaving a smear of blood. The place was silent. She thought it was empty, and for a moment she allowed herself to collapse to the ground. Her body could not hold her weight anymore. Her eyes closed, but before she could rest, she heard it. The faint click of metal being pulled back. A weapon. A human weapon. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. Slowly her eyes opened and she looked up. In the shadow of the broken hall stood a man. His figure was strong and tall, dressed in torn armor patched together with scraps of leather and steel. A rifle was aimed directly at her chest, steady in his hands. His face was scarred, his jaw rough with stubble, his eyes sharp and cautious. A human survivor. She had found one, but not the way she had hoped. To him, she was just another runaway, maybe even a spy for the Baron. His finger rested on the trigger, ready to end her life with a single pull. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. No words came out at first, only a dry rasp from her throat. She swallowed painfully and forced herself to whisper, "Please, don't send me back." Her voice cracked, full of desperation. She could barely lift her head, but her eyes met his. They were wide, filled with fear, but also with something else, hope, fragile and flickering. For years, she had dreamed of someone who might help her, someone who was not the Baron's servant. And now, here was a human, the kind of being she had only heard about in whispers. The man did not lower his weapon. His expression did not soften. He studied her carefully, his eyes scanning the chains still locked around her wrists and ankles, the scars covering her body, the way she shook from weakness. He had seen many lies in his life, many traps set to lure survivors like him into death. But something about her was different. She was too broken, too weak, too desperate to be playing a trick. Still, he did not trust easily. Trust was death in the wasteland. She tried to crawl closer, but her strength gave out and she collapsed at his feet. The chains clattered against the floor. Her thin hands reached forward, not to attack, but to beg. Her voice was faint, almost lost in the silence. "Please, help me." Then her head dropped, and she lay motionless, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The man stood over her, rifle still aimed, but he did not pull the trigger. Something in her broken state stirred a memory deep inside him. Memories of his own people tortured by the Baron, of humans dragged away in chains, of screams he could not forget. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he lowered his weapon. The silence stretched between them. The desert wind howled through the cracks in the walls, carrying the distant echoes of hunters still searching. He looked down at her again, seeing not a spy or a trick, but a survivor, someone who had escaped the same enemy he hated. His jaw tightened. He knew taking her in would bring danger. The Baron would come for her, and anyone who sheltered her would face his wrath. But leaving her here to die would make him no different from the Baron himself. He sighed, a sound heavy with years of loneliness and war. Slinging the rifle across his back, he knelt down and carefully lifted her frail body into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, as if the years of torment had stripped her down to nothing but bones and willpower. Her head rested against his chest, her breathing shallow but steady. She did not wake. She did not even move. For the first time in years, she was in the arms of someone who was not her enemy. The man carried her deeper into the outpost, toward the hidden shelter he had built far beneath the ruins. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? Why did the Baron want her so badly? What kind of danger had he just invited into his life? But as he looked down at her broken form, none of those questions mattered. All he knew was that she had asked him not to send her back. And he could not. Not now. Not ever. The shelter was hidden deep under the ruins, a place the human had carved out piece by piece over years of survival. He carried her carefully down the narrow stairs, his step steady, even as his mind wrestled with doubt. The flicker of a lantern lit the underground chamber. It was small but safe, with old human machines scattered across the corners and shelves lined with cans of food and water bottles. He laid her gently on a rough bed of blankets he had stitched from scraps. For a long moment, he just stared at her, uncertain of what he had done. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale, and her lips cracked. She looked like someone who had been dead long ago, but refused to stop living. He went to a small metal container, filled a cup with water, and returned to her side. He tilted her head slightly and let a few drops fall on her lips. At first, there was no reaction. Then her mouth moved, and she drank, her body trembling at the taste. She opened her eyes, weak and confused, staring up at him. For a second, fear flashed in them, as if she thought he might hurt her. But when she saw his face, the weapon now resting far from reach, her fear softened. She whispered, "Water." He gave her more, slow and careful, until she finally leaned back with tears rolling down her cheeks. She had not tasted clean water in years. The guards in the Baron's fortress had given her only enough to keep her alive, and even that was often dirty, foul, or laced with pain-inducing chemicals. Now the simple act of drinking water felt like a gift beyond measure. She whispered a thank you, her voice barely audible. The man said nothing, only studied her with wary eyes. He was not ready to trust her yet. When she was strong enough, she tried to sit up, but the chains still around her wrists and ankles made it hard. She tugged at them weakly, frustration and shame clear on her face. He noticed and frowned. Kneeling down, he studied the locks, his rough fingers tracing the scars the metal had left on her skin. He went to his tools and returned with a small cutter. "Hold still," he said in a low voice. She froze, afraid at first, but when he pressed the tool against the chain and began to cut, her chest rose with hope. Sparks flew, and after several attempts, the chain on her wrist broke free. She gasped, staring at her hand as if it no longer belonged to her. One by one, he removed the rest, until the last piece of iron clattered to the floor. She rubbed her arms and ankles, tears sliding down her face again. After 13 years, she was no longer bound. The man did not smile. He only warned, "Don't make me regret this." His tone was harsh, but it carried something under it, a quiet honesty. She nodded quickly, lowering her head. She knew he was risking everything by helping her. If the Baron's hunters found her here, they would kill him slowly, just for daring to protect her. He gave her food next, a can of preserved meat and a small piece of bread. She ate slowly, almost fearfully, as if she expected someone to snatch it away. Every bite seemed unreal to her. She had forgotten what real food tasted like. She chewed carefully, her hands shaking. At one point, she stopped and looked at him. Why? Why help me? She asked. Her voice carried both wonder and suspicion. The man did not answer right away. He leaned back against the wall, staring at the lantern light flickering across the metal ceiling. Finally, he muttered, "Because I've seen too many broken by him. I won't add another to the list." The words struck her deeply. For years, she had been nothing more than a possession to the Baron, a toy to break and fix as he pleased. No one had ever spoken about her life as if it mattered. No one had seen her as anything other than property. Now, for the first time, she felt something she thought was long lost: dignity. That night, she slept in the shelter. But her sleep was not peaceful. She woke several times, screaming, clutching at her neck, her arms, her legs, as if the chains were still there. The human rushed to her side, shaking her gently. She would stare at him with wide, terrified eyes, her breath coming fast. He never told her to stop. He only stayed near until her fear settled. Above them, the Baron's hunters scoured the wasteland. Villagers whispered in terror as patrols stormed their homes, searching for the runaway. The Baron's fury grew each day she was not found. He promised pain and death to anyone who dared shelter her. His voice rang across the deserts, broadcast by drones. "She belongs to me. Hand her over, and I will spare you." But in the shelter beneath the ruins, she stayed hidden, trembling but alive. Days passed, and she grew stronger. Her cheeks filled with a little color, her steps became steadier, but the scars on her body and mind remained. Sometimes she would sit silently in the corner, staring at nothing, lost in memories of torment. Other times she would follow him as he worked, watching him fix weapons, repair broken machines, or study maps of the land. She said little, but her eyes carried questions and sometimes gratitude. The human noticed the change. She was still fragile, but there was a fire hidden beneath the weakness, a will that refused to die. He saw it in the way she clenched her fists when she remembered the Baron, in the way she flinched at the sound of distant drones but did not collapse. He began to believe she was more than just a victim. She might yet stand as something greater. Still, danger was always near. At night, the sound of hunters echoed closer. The human kept his rifle ready, his traps set around the ruins. One mistake, and they would both be found. She knew it too. That was why, one night as the firelight glowed softly in the shelter, she whispered, "If they come, let me go. Don't risk yourself for me." Her voice trembled, but she meant it. He looked at her, eyes dark with thought, and then shook his head. No one deserves to go back to him. Not you. Not anyone. In that moment, something changed in her heart. For 13 years, she had survived alone, without hope, without trust. Now, sitting in the quiet shelter with a human who had no reason to help her, she felt a warmth stronger than food or fire. For the first time, she was not only free of chains, she was not alone. The Baron's fury grew with each day that passed without her return. His fortress burned with his anger. He sent squads of hunters into every corner of the desert, their glowing eyes sweeping across villages and markets, dragging people from their homes to question them. Entire families were beaten when they could not answer. He ordered drones to fly over farmlands, their speakers blaring his threats into the night. "She belongs to me. Anyone hiding her will suffer 1,000 times worse." Villagers trembled, their lives shattered under his shadow, but no one had seen where she went. He could not understand how she had vanished so completely. In his mind, there was no possibility that she had escaped his world. To him, she was still a possession, a thing that could not exist without his control. His obsession only deepened. Every hour she was gone, his cruelty spread wider. Farmers were whipped in their fields. Children were taken as hostages. Whole settlements were set on fire just to send a message. To the Baron, it was not only about her. It was about proving that no one could ever break his hold. In the shelter below the ruins, she sat trembling as the human told her what he had seen. He had gone out to scavenge, moving like a shadow through the wasteland, and he returned with stories of villages burning. The Baron's men were searching not just for her, but for signs of human involvement. She covered her face with her hands when she heard it, guilt crashing over her like a storm. "It's because of me," she whispered. "They are suffering because of me." The human watched her with a hard expression. His voice was steady but sharp. It's because of him. Don't blame yourself for his crimes. But she shook her head, her eyes full of tears. For years, she had believed every word the Baron spoke, every cruel whisper that told her she was nothing without him. Now, even free, his shadow still clung to her heart. That night, she tried to stand, her body still weak, and said, "I should leave. If I go, maybe he will stop. Maybe the villages will be safe." She looked at the door of the shelter, as if she could walk into the wasteland and surrender. But before she could take a step, the human grabbed her arm and spun her around. His voice was louder than she had ever heard before. "Do you think he'll stop if you give yourself up? He'll drag you back in chains and kill twice as many just to prove he owns you." She froze, staring at him with wide eyes. His anger was not like the Baron's. It was not cruelty. It was fire, burning against injustice. His grip on her arm was strong, but it did not hurt. He released her quickly, as if ashamed of his own outburst, and stepped back. His next words came quieter, heavy with meaning. "You've already lost 13 years. Don't give him the rest." She sank to the floor, silent tears running down her face. For so long, no one had ever spoken for her, never stood on her side. The human's words shook something deep inside her. Slowly, she realized he was right. If she gave herself up, the Baron would only use her as an example to tighten his chains around others. Her freedom was not only hers, it was a spark, small but dangerous, that the Baron feared. The human began preparing weapons that night. He cleaned his rifle, sharpened blades, and adjusted traps around the shelter. She watched him, her heart full of both fear and wonder. He was risking everything for her, a stranger he had only just met. "Why?" she asked again, voice trembling. "Why do you fight for me?" He paused, looked at her with tired eyes, and answered simply, "Because no one else will, and because I know what it's like to lose everything." She did not press him with questions. She could see in his scars and in his silence that his past carried pain just as hers did. For the first time, she felt a bond, thin but real, tying her to another person. It was fragile, but it gave her strength. Outside, the Baron's fury reached a new height. He gathered his elite hunters, creatures more brutal than any he had released before. Their bodies were covered in armor plates, their claws dipped in poison, their senses sharp enough to track the faintest scent across miles. "Find her," he growled. "Tear apart every ruin, every stone. If a human stands in your way, burn them alive." His voice was a storm, and his army moved like a flood into the wasteland. The human knew it was only a matter of time before they found his hidden shelter. He could see it in her eyes, too, the fear of being taken again, the fear of dragging him down with her. She tried one last time to make him let her go. Her voice was soft, pleading. "If you protect me, you will die. Please, don't throw away your life." But he only shook his head, loading his rifle with a firm hand. His answer came steady, like unshakable stone. "No one deserves to go back to that monster. Not you. Not anyone. If it costs me my life, then so be it. But I won't let him win." Her lips trembled. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was a fool, but the words would not come. Deep inside, her heart was already breaking down the walls she had built over years of torture. For the first time in 13 years, she felt a truth stronger than her fear. She was not alone. Someone had chosen to stand with her, not for gain, not for power, but simply because it was right. That night, as she lay on the bed of blankets, she could not sleep. She watched the lantern light flicker across the walls and listened to the quiet sound of the human preparing for battle. For the first time since her escape, she did not dream of chains. Instead, she dreamed of fighting, of standing beside someone who refused to give up. And in the depths of the fortress, the Baron sharpened his blade, whispering to himself with a cruel smile, "She cannot hide forever. She is mine." The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the crackle of fire in the small shelter. The human sat awake, his rifle across his knees, listening for any sound beyond the ruins. His instincts told him danger was close. He had lived long enough under the Baron's shadow to know the rhythm of the hunt, and this silence was not natural. She lay on the blankets, her eyes half open, unable to sleep. The fear inside her heart was growing. She felt it too, the storm before the strike. Then it came. The first sign was the faint glow on the horizon, not of sunrise, but of moving lights. Drones. Their beams swept across the desert like knives. The ground began to tremble under the march of hunters, their claws scraping rock, their growls carrying through the night air. She sat up, trembling, her hands clutching the fabric of her blanket. "They've found us," she whispered. The human stood, calm but firm, checking his weapon. "Then we fight." Outside, the hunters spread across the ruins like a black tide. Their eyes glowed red in the darkness, searching every shadow, sniffing the air for her scent. Drones buzzed overhead, their lights piercing cracks in the stone walls. The Baron had sent not only hunters but soldiers as well, armored aliens wielding cruel spears and burning weapons. The wasteland echoed with the sound of their advance. The human grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet. "Stay close," he ordered. She nodded, her heart racing so fast it felt like it might break her chest. Her legs shook, but she forced herself to stand. The memories of her years in chains filled her mind. The beatings, the darkness, the Baron's mocking voice, but she pushed them aside. This time, she was not alone. This time, she would not just be prey. The first attack came swiftly. A hunter beast leapt through the shattered wall, its jaws wide, teeth dripping with poison. The human raised his rifle and fired. The shot echoed like thunder in the ruins. The beast collapsed, its body twitching on the floor. Smoke filled the room from the gunfire, but there was no time to breathe. Another beast lunged from the shadows. Before the human could reload, she acted. Her trembling hands grabbed a broken metal rod from the ground, and with a cry, she slammed it against the creature's face. The blow was weak compared to its strength, but it distracted the beast long enough for the human to fire again, ending it. She stared at the blood on the floor, her chest heaving, her hands shaking. But in her eyes burned something new, a spark of courage. The ruins shook as explosives tore apart the upper levels. Soldiers poured in, shouting in their alien tongue. The human pulled her behind a wall, firing shot after shot. His movements were precise, each bullet finding its mark. But there were too many of them. He set off one of his traps, and a chain of explosions ripped through the entrance, sending stone and bodies flying. For a moment, the noise was deafening. Dust filled the air, choking them both, but the path was clear. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her deeper into the tunnels. They ran, their footsteps echoing, chased by the growls of hunters and the hiss of alien weapons. The tunnels were narrow, the walls pressing in, but the human knew the way. He had built this maze to confuse enemies. Behind them, screams and snarls echoed as more beasts fell into traps, spikes, collapsing ceilings, hidden explosives. But still, more came. The Baron would not stop. They reached a chamber at the heart of the ruins. The human turned quickly, forcing her behind a wall. "Stay here," he said. His voice was steady, but she could hear the weight in it. He knew this might be their last stand. She shook her head, her eyes wet. "No, I won't hide." He stared at her, surprised, but then he saw the fire in her eyes. She was done running. She was done being silent. The door burst open, and soldiers stormed in. The human fired, dropping two instantly. Another charged, swinging a blade. The human met him head-on, striking with his rifle butt, then driving a knife into the alien's throat. Blood sprayed across the floor. Another beast leapt, but before it reached the human, she picked up the fallen soldier's weapon and thrust it forward. The blade pierced the creature's chest, and it collapsed at her feet. She gasped, her body shaking, but she did not let go of the weapon. The human glanced at her, pride flickering across his scarred face. The battle raged. The chamber echoed with screams, gunfire, and the clash of steel. She fought beside him, clumsy but fierce, her fear turning into fury. For every memory of pain, every scar the Baron had left on her body, she struck harder. The human moved with skill and precision, covering her when she faltered, guiding her when she stumbled. Together, they stood against wave after wave of enemies, the floor littered with broken bodies and smoking weapons. And then he came. The Baron himself stepped into the chamber, his towering form casting a shadow across the firelit walls. His armor glinted, his mask shone with cruelty, and his voice filled the air like poison. "You cannot take what is mine," he hissed. His soldiers fell back, giving him space. His eyes locked on her, and she felt the same chill she had known for 13 years. But this time, she did not bow. This time she gripped the weapon tighter, standing beside the human. The Baron laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Do you think this human can save you? He is weak." You are weak. You belong to me. His words cut into her like blades, stirring old fear. But then she heard the human's voice beside her, strong and steady. She belongs to no one. His rifle rose, pointed directly at the Baron. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. The hunters growled, the soldiers shifted, and the Baron's eyes burned with rage. She stood trembling, but her feet did not move. For the first time, she stood not behind the human, but beside him, ready to fight. The Baron had come to reclaim his prize, but what stood before him now was no longer a broken slave. It was a woman who had found her courage, and a human who would rather die than let her be taken again. The battle for freedom was about to begin. The Baron stepped forward, his towering body blocking the dim light of the chamber. His armored boots struck the ground like hammers, each step echoing against the ruined walls. The glow of his mask burned with cruel satisfaction, as though he had already won. Around him, the hunters and soldiers stood still, waiting for their master to finish what they could not. His voice rumbled, sharp and venomous. You cannot run anymore. You thought you could hide with a human? Pathetic. You are mine, and I will chain you again until you forget freedom ever existed. Her body shook at the sound of his words. Memories crashed into her mind. 13 years of pain, chains that cut her skin, nights when she prayed to die but was forced to live. For a heartbeat, fear nearly broke her again. Her knees weakened, her breath faltered. The Baron saw it and laughed, a sound so cold it made the hunters hiss in pleasure. He raised his hand, reaching toward her as if she was already caught. But then she felt the warmth beside her. The human stood close, his rifle steady, his eyes burning with defiance. He did not speak softly or shout in anger. His voice was calm, sharp, and unyielding. She belongs to no one, not anymore. The Baron snarled and raised his weapon, a massive blade forged from black steel. The chamber erupted into chaos. The hunters lunged forward, but the human fired, dropping two before they could strike. She swung the alien spear she held, clashing with claws that tried to tear her apart. Her arms burned from the effort, but she did not back down. Every strike she made was fueled by years of torment. For every lash, every scar, she fought harder. The floor became slick with blood and sparks as the battle raged. Then the Baron charged. His blade crashed against the human's rifle, sparks flying as metal struck metal. The force sent the human staggering back, but he held his ground. The Baron swung again, each strike so powerful it shattered stone pillars around them. The human blocked, dodged, and countered, his movements sharp but desperate. He was skilled, but the Baron was a monster, larger and stronger than any soldier he had faced before. Each blow pushed him closer to the edge. She watched, fear clawing at her chest, but she knew she could not freeze now. She picked up the broken chains from the ground, the same chains that had held her for 13 years. Wrapping them around her hands, she ran forward with a cry that tore through the chamber. The Baron turned, surprised, as she struck his armored arm with the chains. Sparks flew, and the sound of iron against steel rang out. The sight of her, once his broken prisoner, now standing against him, made his fury explode. He roared, pushing her back with a swipe that nearly cut her down. But she rolled aside, bruised yet alive. The human seized the moment. He fired at the Baron's exposed chest, the bullets denting his armor, slowing his movements. The Baron howled, slamming his blade into the ground. The impact shook the chamber, throwing dust and rubble into the air. For a moment, everything was hidden in smoke. In that darkness, the hunters attacked wildly, but she struck with her chains, and wrapping them around one creature's neck and pulling until it collapsed. Another lunged, but the human cut it down with his knife. The smoke cleared, and the Baron stood in the center, his armor cracked, his mask scorched, but his fury greater than ever. "You dare strike me with my own chains?" he growled at her. "You were nothing! You are nothing!" He swung his blade down, aiming to crush her. She raised her arms, ready for death, but the human threw himself forward, blocking the strike with his rifle. The weapon bent under the force, but it held long enough for him to shove the Baron back. "She is not nothing," he shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. "She is free." The Baron roared and rushed again, but this time she was ready. With the broken chain still in her hands, she leapt forward and whipped them around the Baron's arm, yanking with all her strength. For years, those chains had been symbols of her suffering, but now they became her weapon. The Baron stumbled, pulled off balance. The human took the chance, drawing his last knife and driving it deep into the Baron's chest, between the cracks of his armor. The blade pierced through, and the Baron froze. His glowing eyes dimmed as he staggered back, blood spilling from the wound. The hunters shrieked in confusion, their master faltering before them. The Baron gasped, his voice a mix of rage and disbelief. I cannot fall to a human. But his legs gave way, and he collapsed to the ground, the black blade slipping from his grip. The chamber shook as his massive body hit the floor. Silence fell for the first time in years. The hunters hissed in panic before scattering into the wasteland, leaderless and broken. The Baron's rule ended with his last breath. She stood trembling, staring at the body of the one who had owned her life for 13 years. The chains slipped from her hands, clattering on the ground. For a moment, she could not believe it was real. The nightmare that had haunted her for so long was over. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed. Tears poured down her face, but they were not only tears of pain. They were tears of release, of freedom she thought she would never feel. The human knelt beside her, his chest heaving, his face covered in blood and dust. He reached out, his hand steady despite the battle they had just survived. She looked at him, her body shaking, and then without hesitation, she fell into his arms. For the first time in 13 years, she did not feel fear when someone touched her. She felt warmth. She felt safe. The chamber was quiet now, only the crackle of distant flames echoing in the ruins. She pressed her face against his chest, whispering through her tears, "It's over." His arms tightened around her as he answered softly, "You're free now." And in that moment, surrounded by the ruins of chains and blood, she knew it was true. She was no longer a prisoner. She was no longer the Baron's possession. She was free, and in the arms of the human who had fought for her freedom, she found something even greater: hope for a life she had never dared to dream.